Why do we hold on to the very pain we claim we want freedom from? Why does it feel safer to bleed than to be whole? Why do we wrap our wounds in silk, kiss the bruise and call it home? You say you want healing, but every time peace knocks, you pretend not to hear it. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, healing feels like betrayal. Betrayal of who you've been, what you've survived, what you've called yours for so long. There's a silence in healing that terrifies people who grew up in noise. There's a stillness in peace that feels like death to the ones who've only ever come alive in pain. Most people don't cling to their suffering because they love it. They cling because they don't know who they are without it. The wound becomes a compass, the ache a familiar rhythm, and somewhere along the way, the pain began to speak louder than the soul. That's the truth no one wants to admit. The pain became a personality, and to let it go feels like erasing the last version of yourself that was ever seen. We aren't addicted to the pain itself. We're addicted to the meaning we made out of it, the story it gave us, the identity it etched into our bones. I was the broken one. I was the one no one chose. I was the one who always got hurt. That story, as suffocating as it is, makes sense. It explains things. It shields us from the chaos of not knowing who we are without it. You learned how to function with the wound, how to build walls around it, decorate it, feed it attention so it wouldn't grow hungry and turn feral. You kept it alive like a shrine. And now the thought of abandoning it feels like murder. Who would you be without your pain? That question alone makes the ego flinch. Because the ego doesn't want freedom. It wants familiarity. It wants patterns, even if those patterns are laced in poison. It wants predictability, even if that means slow emotional death. You say you want to let go. But letting go isn't just dropping the weight. It's losing the arms that have always held it. It's walking into a life where your pain is no longer your proof of existence. And that, to someone who has only known life through struggle, feels like erasure. So we self-sabotage. We stay in the relationships that gut us. We keep wearing the labels that hurt us. We replay the memories that haunt us. We keep the wound warm, tucked in, safe. Not because we're weak, but because the wound is the only part of us that's never left. And in a world where everything else walks away, we'd rather keep the pain than risk the silence that might follow its absence. But what if the silence isn't empty? What if the silence is where your soul speaks? What if letting go isn't abandonment, but arrival? Let's go deeper. You said you wanted peace, but secretly you missed the chaos. Not because it felt good, but because it felt like home. There's a part of you that still writes love letters to the fire that once burned you, hoping maybe this time the flames will warm instead of consume. We romanticize destruction not because we're broken, but because somewhere along the way, the destruction became beautiful. It became art. It became the poem we lived inside. It gave you depth, didn't it? It gave you something to feel, something to survive, something to rise from. And when you looked in the mirror, the scars made you feel like you had a story worth telling. So you clung to the fire, danced with it, slept beside it, begged it to stay, even as it singed your edges into ash. Because at least in the fire, you felt something. At least in the burning, you were alive. And isn't that the twisted part? You found aliveness in what was killing you. You found identity in what was hurting you. You confused suffering for depth and dysfunction for passion. You told yourself this is what love must feel like, because love never showed up any other way. The people who said they loved you always left bruises. The comfort you knew as a child always came with a cost. So you kept returning to that emotional currency, buying pain with pieces of yourself because that's the only exchange you were taught. You stitched your self-worth to how much you could endure. You equated intensity with intimacy. And now, peace feels like a scam. Safety feels fake. Stability feels boring. And you, somewhere deep down, don't trust what doesn't hurt. So when love comes gently, you doubt it. When something feels too calm, too pure, too quiet, you pick at it. You light little matches, stir the storm, test its strength. Not because you're cruel, but because the fire is what you know. It's where your nervous system feels at home. And your body, even if your mind knows better, keeps reaching for what once scorched you. The fire became your ritual. It's where you met yourself. It's where you proved you could survive. You wrote poems about it. You bled meaning out of it. You baptized your pain and called it transformation. But there's a difference between sacred pain and recycled suffering, between awakening and addiction. And you have to ask yourself, are you still growing? Or are you just reliving the same story with different characters, different names, different masks? We say we want to change, but we write love letters to the fire behind our backs. We text the chaos when no one's looking. We light candles to the very patterns that keep us in emotional chains. Because there's comfort in the combustion, there's power in the pain, and there's still a part of you that believes you're only as worthy as what you've endured. But what if your worth isn't in the ashes? What if it was never meant to burn at all? Let's keep going. The hardest part about letting go isn't the pain, it's the familiarity. It's looking into the face of what breaks you and realizing it reminds you of home. Some of the most destructive things in your life didn't arrive as villains. They wore familiar faces. They spoke in voices you loved. They echoed patterns you were raised in. And that's why it's so hard to walk away. Because the wound doesn't just hurt. It looks like comfort. It looks like your mother's silence, your father's absence, that teacher's harsh tone, that lover's hot and cold affection. You don't just bond with people, you bond with patterns. And when those patterns mirror the emotional climate you were born into, your body says, yes, this feels like love, even if it's breaking you. No one talks about the grief that comes with healing, not the grief of what you lost, but the grief of what you never had. The realization that the love you received was laced with conditions, that safety was a performance, that affection always had an expiration date. So when someone loves you gently, you panic. When peace enters, you hold your breath, waiting for the punchline, because your nervous system is wired for disruption. You don't just fear being hurt, you fear the absence of hurt because you've built your world around managing pain. You know how to survive chaos. You've learned to predict the storms. You've trained yourself to read the temperature of a room before anyone even speaks. But calm is foreign, and foreign feels unsafe, even if it's what you've always deserved. We inherit more than eye color and bone structure. We inherit emotional scripts. Coping mechanisms disguised as personality traits, beliefs disguised as truth. You didn't choose to seek out the things that hurt you. You were taught in subtle, invisible ways that love is earned, that safety is temporary, that worth is conditional. So now you chase what confirms that. You date the one who withholds, the friend who competes, the job that drains, and you say, why does this always happen to me? But it's not happening to you. It's happening through you, through the echoes of your unhealed past. Shadows with familiar faces aren't easy to walk away from, because to walk away means admitting that what you called love was actually survival, that what you thought was normal was never okay, that the people you protected were part of your undoing. And that's not easy. That's a kind of death most people never choose, so they stay. They call the poison medicine. They call the control love. They stay loyal to pain out of legacy, out of guilt, out of fear that without the shadows, they'll vanish too. But what if the real you is on the other side of that shadow? What if the unfamiliar is your actual home? What if love isn't supposed to hurt and safety doesn't have to be earned? What if your whole life has been a rehearsal for the letting go that begins right now? Let's continue. There's a silence waiting for you on the other side of the pain, but you don't trust it. You don't trust what doesn't scream. You don't trust the peace because peace doesn't validate your story. Pain does. Pain tells you who you are. And without it, you're lost in a mirror with no reflection. You say you want to heal, but healing is an identity death. And ego doesn't go quietly. It claws, it gaslights, it bargains. It tells you that without the ache, you'll disappear. It tells you that freedom is too high a price if it means leaving behind the roles you've rehearsed your whole life. The victim, the fighter, the survivor, the broken one who made it through. But who are you when there's nothing left to fight? That's the terror, isn't it? That letting go means letting go of who you've been. That maybe the sadness you carry has been your compass for so long, you wouldn't know which direction is yours without it. That maybe you don't want to heal if it means becoming a stranger to the self you've been defending for years. Because pain gave you edges, pain gave you meaning, pain made you interesting. And if you let it go, if you lay it down, if you stop rehearsing the grief, who are you now? Who do you become when the fire you built your identity on finally burns out? Most people don't fear freedom. They fear the responsibility that comes with it. Because when you're no longer defined by your trauma, you can't hide behind it. You have to show up. You have to rebuild. You have to stop blaming the past for the person you keep choosing to be. And that's terrifying because accountability feels like self-erasure when your whole story is rooted in being wronged. But healing isn't erasing. It's remembering who you were before the wound taught you how to survive. It's not forgetting the pain. It's realizing it's no longer the author of your worth. But ego doesn't want to dissolve. It wants to stay in control. It wants to know who it is, even if who it is hurting. So when you try to let go, it panics. It tells you this new path is unsafe. It tells you that if you surrender, you'll fall apart. It makes noise. It triggers old ghosts. It distracts you with familiar cravings, not because it's evil, but because it's afraid. The ego is a scared child who only learned love through fear, worth through pain, and identity through wounds. So when you move toward truth, toward peace, toward light, it doesn't know what to do. It tells you you're abandoning yourself, but you're not. You're finally returning. And yes, it feels like death. Because in a way it is. But maybe the version of you that's dying isn't the real you at all. Maybe it's just the mask you wore to survive what you never deserved in the first place. Let's keep peeling it back. You thought healing would feel like sunlight, like breath, like ease. But sometimes it feels like staring into a mirror that finally stops lying. It's not the pain that breaks you, it's the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't whisper. It roars, it shakes the walls of your identity. It shatters the stories you've been living inside. Healing isn't a soft glow. Sometimes it's a violent cracking open, a brutal unmasking, a moment when you realize the person you've been pretending to be was just a survival response in costume. And when that mirror cracks, when the image you held so tightly no longer reflects back with praise or protection, you're left with the rawest thing of all, who you really are. You see, healing doesn't ask you to become someone new. It demands you to stop being who you're not. That's what makes it unbearable for most. Because being broken gave you purpose. Being guarded gave you boundaries. Being angry gave you armor. But healing strips you bare. It takes away your excuses, your projections, your justifications. It lays your patterns out like bones on a table and asks you, without flinching, are you ready to see the part you played? And that's when most people run, not because they're weak, but because it's easier to stay wounded than to admit that the wound has been self-sustained long after the harm was done. You begin to realize that no one is holding the knife anymore, that you've been the one pressing the blade to your skin, not out of malice, but out of memory, because pain is what you knew how to hold, because forgiveness felt too much like letting someone off the hook, because freedom felt too lonely when pain was the only thing that ever stayed. But now the mirror cracks, and with it, the illusions, the roles, the victimhood, the martyrdom. All the things that made you feel powerful in your suffering suddenly look small under the light of awareness. It hurts. But it's sacred, because what breaks you also opens you. What shatters you also shows you the parts that need to be rebuilt, not out of pain, but out of presence. Healing doesn't erase your past. It puts it in its rightful place. It stops letting your trauma sit in the driver's seat. It says, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt, but no, it doesn't get to write the rest of your story. And in that moment, you have a choice: to gather the shards and glue them back into the same false reflection, or to let the mirror stay broken and learn to see yourself not through a crafted image, but through truth. Raw, imperfect, and finally real. The mirror has cracked. And what's on the other side isn't someone new, it's someone honest. Let's keep going. There's a strange ache that comes when the door finally opens and you don't walk through it. The prison's unlocked, The chains are rusted, the walls are paper thin, but you stay. Not because you want to suffer, but because you've learned to crave the cage. It's the kind of craving that makes no sense on the surface, but the soul knows. The soul remembers what it cost to survive, and sometimes even freedom feels like a threat when all you've ever known is confinement. You don't just fear the unknown, you fear the unfamiliar self that lives on the other side of it. The cage is predictable, it's structured. You know where the walls are even if they hurt. You've memorized the rhythms of your pain. You've built rituals around your limitations. You've carved your name into the prison floor and called it purpose. So when someone comes with light in their eyes and says, "You can leave now," your first instinct isn't to run, it's to retreat, to find the corner you used to cry in, to touch the lock one more time just to be sure it's real. Because if the cage is open, then your suffering is a choice. And if your suffering is a choice, then you have to face the part of you that's still choosing it. And you are choosing it, not because you want to, but because it's the only language your body speaks fluently. Peace feels foreign, joy feels suspicious, and love, real, unearned, unconditional love, feels almost violent in how unfamiliar it is. So you sabotage it. You push it away, you poke holes in it until it leaks just enough pain to feel safe again. You choose people who mirror your wound instead of your worth. You stay in places that reflect your doubt instead of your divinity. You crave the cage, not because you're broken, but because you were taught that safety is earned through suffering. It's spiritual masochism, the belief that pain is more noble than peace, that struggle proves you're alive, that if it doesn't hurt, it isn't worth it. So you make peace complicated. You turn joy into a test. You withhold love from yourself because you think you haven't bled enough to deserve it yet. But how long will you punish yourself for a crime you didn't commit? How long will you sit in the cell of your old beliefs, waiting for a freedom that's already here? The truth is, the cage was never locked. It was just familiar. And sometimes familiarity is a harder chain to break than steel. But this is the moment you see it. This is the breath where you realize the cage only exists if you believe in it. The walls are made of memory, the bars are made of fear, and the key has always been yours. So the question isn't, can you be free? The question is, will you stop craving what kept you caged? Let's walk closer. You thought peace would feel like relief, like light pouring in after a long storm. But what they never tell you is that peace can feel like withdrawal, like detox, like shaking in the silence because your nervous system doesn't know what to do without the noise. Drama was your heartbeat, chaos was your pulse, pain was your rhythm. So when it stops, when the war ends, when the battlefield goes quiet, you're left in a silence so loud it terrifies you. You sit there trembling, not because something's wrong, but because nothing is. You see, most people aren't afraid of the fight. They're afraid of the stillness that follows. Because stillness makes you feel everything you've been running from. Without the distractions, the numbing, the emotional noise, you're left face to face with yourself. And that's where the real discomfort begins. Not in the healing, but in receiving it, in allowing it, in not needing to earn it anymore. You're so used to performing for peace that when it shows up unconditionally, you reject it. You poke it, you test it, you light little fires around its edges to see if it'll run, because you still believe that love must be proven, that joy must be paid for, that calm is suspicious. So you stir, you replay old wounds, you summon old ghosts, you create emotional turbulence just to feel anchored again, because at least when it hurts, you know where you are, but when it doesn't, you feel lost. That's the part no one talks about, the disorientation of wellness, the dizziness of stability. When the ground finally holds you, you question it. When someone says, "You're safe now," you flinch. Because peace doesn't feel like peace. Not at first. It feels like a void, like a cliff with no fall, like a home with no walls to push against. You've been conditioned to survive, not to rest, to hustle for love, not to receive it, to brace for impact, not to breathe. So now that the storm has passed, you don't trust the sky. You keep scanning for clouds. You keep listening for thunder, but none comes. And in that silence, you're invited into the hardest thing of all, softness. Not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to stop fighting, to stop bracing, to stop using pain as proof. And it will hurt. It will hurt. but not in the way you think. Not because something is wrong, but because your body is unlearning decades of self-defense. You're not broken. You're detoxing from dysfunction. You're not lost. You're just walking unfamiliar ground. You're not numb. You're adjusting to the intensity of peace. So stay in the discomfort. Let the stillness shake you. Let the calm feel strange. This is not the absence of feeling. This is the return of presence. And the more you let it in, the more your soul remembers. You were never meant to live in war. You were born for peace. Let's go deeper still. This part will feel like grief, but not because you're losing something good, because you're losing something familiar. The version of you that only knew how to survive, the one who lived through tension, measured their worth through wounds, made pain a personality. You wore them like a second skin, but they were never meant to stay. Now they're dissolving, slowly, quietly. And that emptiness, that's not loss, that's space being made. Ego death isn't loud, it's lonely. It's waking up and realizing the roles you played no longer fit, the mask is too tight, the story is outdated. It's not becoming someone new, it's remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And the ego, it resists, it clings, it makes you doubt. If I let this go, what will I be? But the truth is, you'll be free. You'll be the version of you that doesn't need pain to feel real, that doesn't fear peace, that doesn't crave chaos just to remember what aliveness feels like. This death isn't your ending, it's your invitation to soften, to expand, to stop shrinking for the sake of belonging. Grieve that old self. Thank them. They got you here. But don't carry them into tomorrow. They were built for the war that's over now. You're not dying, you're arriving. You thought the fire would destroy you. But look, you're still here. Ashes on your feet, yes. Scars on your hands. But something else too. A glow, a softness, a strength that doesn't need to scream anymore. You didn't escape the pain, you transmuted it. You turned the wound into wisdom, the chaos into clarity, the breakdown into breath. Because healing was never about going back to who you were. It was about rising into who you were always becoming. And every time you let go of the story, the identity, the pattern, you didn't lose yourself. You found a piece of the truth buried beneath it. And now, the fire that once burned you warms you. It lights your path. It no longer consumes, it illuminates. You see now, it was never the pain that made you powerful. It was the choice to grow through it, to stay soft, to stay open, to stay honest, even when it would have been easier to shut down, to numb out, to go back to the cage you once called home. But you didn't. You stood in the heat, and you let it change you. This is what freedom feels like. Not a perfect life, but a reclaimed self. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of you, whole, clear, awake. So let the fire light your way. Let the past bless your becoming. And let the world see who you've become, not in spite of the pain, but because you dared to alchemize it. The fire didn't break you, it revealed you.